So the day kicks off with our crime panel. It's always good to start the day with a bit of nefarious crime, in my experience, and I'm very pleased to welcome from around the world 3 crime authors who are going to talk about their work today. So in no particular order other than the order that they are written on my piece of paper, we have Trevor Wood, who is in the most glamorous location of the 3. Trevor, where are you?
I'm in a very sunny Newcastle upon Tyne.
There we go. Newcastle upon Tyne. We can't beat that, I don't think, but we'll give it a go. Catherine Cooper joins us from, where are you, Catherine?
I'm in the south of France, in the Ariège.
Okay, well, the south of France and Newcastle will weigh up the pros and cons of those perhaps later on. And finally, Tom Benjamin, who joins us from
Bologna, in the north of Italy, which is rather humid at the moment, I must say.
So there we go. We are really kicking off with a global panel between Italy, France, and Newcastle, pride of the UK. There we go. So we have Trevor Wood, who is the author of The Man on the Street, the CWA Crime Writers Association best debut novel of 2020. Also made it to the Guardian Book of the Year list. Catherine is the author of The Chalet, which was a Sunday Times top 5 bestseller. And Tom is the author of the books A Quiet Death in Italy and Hunting Season. And we will begin by just learning a little bit more, for those that have not read any of these titles, about these books. Ladies first. Catherine, tell us all about The Chalet.
Okay, so Chalet is here. It was my debut novel. It's, as you may be able to guess, set largely in a French ski resort. It has 2 timelines. Basically, in the 20 years ago, 2 men went out skiing, only one came back. And then in the present day, you've got another group of people staying in a very luxurious chalet. And really, it's for the reader to work out how the 2 are connected.
Excellent. Trevor, what's The Man on the Street about?
The Man on the Street is the first in a series featuring Jimmy Mullen, who is a homeless veteran suffering from PTSD. In The Man on the Street, he sees a murder, but nobody believes him. And he's trying to ignore it and keep hidden as he prefers. When he sees an appeal from a young girl looking for a missing father, and he thinks he recognizes the man, so he contacts her and gets dragged in to try and find out what happened to him. It's followed by the sequel, One Way Street, which is out in about 3 days' time, which features more of Jimmy's adventures in a homeless series that I didn't realize I was writing until the publishers told me it was a series.
That's often the way these things go, isn't it? And I know The Chalet as well has another. Is it part of a series? The next one, is it connected, or is it unconnected?
It looks very similar, as you can see. They've obviously made the covers. So Chateau's not out yet, but they've made the covers to look similar. But no, it's also set between France and London. But no, the characters are all different. The stories are totally standalone. Publishers
love similar covers, Mark. I'm contractually obliged, as you can see, to have the Tyne Bridge on my cover. The only landmark anybody recognises, apparently.
I would also say from the fact that the library has quite an extensive crime and thriller section, and we separate out crime and thriller because some people like police procedural and not the kind of espionage side, and vice versa. I think there is a law, isn't there, in publishing, that if you're writing anything that connects with thrillers, it has to have the silhouette of a man walking away from you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
It's exactly the same as if you're writing a family saga. You have to have a lady with a baby in front of some black and white houses.
I'm just about to get my suggested covers for book 3, and I guarantee you there will be a Tyne Bridge and a silhouetted man walking away.
I should be very disappointed if there's not. Tom, tell us about your titles.
Right, well, my titles are, like me, set in Italy, and actually you'll be able to see from my cover, the cover pretty much says it all. Here's Italy on the cover of A Quiet Death in Italy. The first, my debut is concerned with my English detective, Daniel Lester, who lives in Bologna and belongs to his father-in-law's private detective agency. And he's asked to look into the death of a aging political activist who's found floating in the canals that run beneath the streets of Bologna. And yeah, that introduces us to the series. And yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I always set out to write a series. So both A Quiet Death and The Hunting Season, and the book next year, Requiem in La Rossa, they all feature the same detective, Daniel, and his family. Which, because of course the detective agency is a family-run business, and they really explore different elements of Bolognese and Italian life through the various crimes they, Daniel ends up investigating, really. So in the first one, a lot of it's about the tension between the town hall and the squatting movement, and the gradual kind of gentrification of Bologna, whereas the second, The Hunting Season, another kind of nice picture of Italy here, you'll see. Although there is the kind of, there are the sinister crows in the background, you see, which indicate that it is a crime story.
Another good crime and thriller motif on a cover, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah,
that's right. So yeah, whereas The Hunting Season looks more at food, obviously, food in Bologna, which is kind of trying to sell itself as food city, and in particular the disappearance of an American super taster who has been asked to check out some truffles. And so I go into the whole kind of counterfeit truffle trade, and which, a lot of people might not know about, but believe me, it exists.
You don't get a lot of that in Newcastle, Tom, I have to say.
it would be the counterfeit butty trade.
Steady.
I feel that I need to know more about counterfeit truffles now, but this is possibly not the time to go into too much detail about that. There's just a note in the chat from Lucy Sampson, who says that we forgot to mention the woman in the red coat, which of course is another obvious book cover motif. Anybody who's seen Schindler's List will know precisely why they put somebody in a red coat. Talking about the chat before we go any further, if anybody attending wants to ask a question of any of our lovely authors, you are perfectly free to do so. Please type any questions as they come up into the chat window. Please precede them with the word question in capital letters if possible, because it helps me to spot them as I'm scrolling through. And I'll try and pull questions out. We'll make some time at the end if necessary, but if anything relevant comes up whilst we're talking, this is quite an informal panel, we'll just throw them in. So yeah, any comments or any questions, drop them in the chat window. You can use the chat window anytime you like, all day. It doesn't interrupt what we're doing particularly, so that's absolutely fine. You've all mentioned your surroundings when you were talking about your plots there, the Tyne Bridge, the counterfeit truffle trade, the lovely south of France. Do you all draw inspiration from your surroundings when you're plotting your titles?
I do, certainly. Yeah, I live right in the city centre, really. And when I was writing the first book, I spent quite a bit of time just wandering around with a camera and taking photos of various places. Even though I knew them quite well, I wanted to get it right in the book, really. And it's a very small city, so I think it's ideal for a crime novel, because there really is no place to hide. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. It's incredibly small. It's only about 4 miles from one side to the other, both ways.
That's the distance between two places in Devon, Trevor, where we.
That's why I haven't set a crime novel in Devon. Oh, sorry.
You can't get away with anything down here. What about you, Catherine? You're in a very different area. Do you draw inspiration in a similar way?
Yeah, I mean the chalet obviously was set in the mountains. I live fairly near the mountains, but I'm a really, really keen skier. So I've spent a lot of time in ski resorts, and my ski resort's actually fictional, so I sort of took a different approach to Trevor, really, and I wanted to take lots of different elements. But yeah, I mean, the setting, it was very, I mean, it always struck me that, I mean, there've been millions of ski resort novels this winter, but until this, I hadn't read any before, and it always struck me that a ski resort was the ideal location for a thriller, in that it's very beautiful, but it's also very dangerous, and also you have a very transient population, not just the holidaymakers, but even the people that live and work there don't really tend to stay that long. And yeah, for the second one, the Chateau, again, it's based on a very fictionalized version of where I live. There aren't actually that many chateaux here, although there are some. But again, I made up a region, which is a kind of mishmash of various things, partly because I didn't want to offend my neighbours in any way. But yes, it's kind of inspired by the scenery, and although it's very much set among the expat community, and so again, there was some inspiration taken from people. Yeah.
Tom, people, places inspire your work too?
Oh well, absolutely. For me, the setting came first, and the crime came after, to be honest with you. And really, you know, the Daniel Lester series springs very much from my own experience as an immigrant here in Italy. You know, when I first came here, I found myself sort of doing some rather unorthodox jobs. You know, to help me learn the language, for example, I was working in a homeless canteen and so on and so forth. So I saw a very different side of Italy, and that got me thinking about Italy and Italian culture. And you know, I do tend to say that you know, Daniel, the protagonist in my novels, is unraveling the mystery of Italy as much as the mysteries themselves. And I very much felt like that. And in a way, the novels are my way of working through my experience of living in Italy, and you know, the various crimes, because crime is very interesting because it pushes at the margins of society, and it tests society and enables you to look at society as an outsider. And you know, my detective, in a sense, he was my dream me, in so much as you know, while I was still struggling with the language in the first book, at least, you know, Daniel was absolutely fluent, and so I could kind of, you know, project you know, Daniel into situations that I'd like to see myself. Yeah, I think that it's very much how I saw Bologna as I've been moving through it. You know, when I first arrived, there were literally squatters who had squatted a you know, palazzo at the end of our street, and then, you know, the Carabinieri came and there was a huge battle as they tried to get them out. And you know, you had the commune, which is the council, you know, trying to sell itself as Bologna as a tourist, you know, destination. There are lots of demonstrations about that, and that just kind of gave me you know, the plot for the first novel. You know, the second novel, as I've become more sort of intertwined with Italian society, you know, I've learned more stories, and you know, I've got a friend who told me about his grandfather who had his truffle dog stolen, and then he would introduce me, you know, he introduced me to, you know, the local kind of truffle culture, and the guys who would like turn up at the back of a restaurant with a, you know, a pocket stuffed full of Bulgarian truffles, which they would like try to pass off as, you know, the local truffles and so on. So yeah, so for me, really, the setting did come first, and you know, the crime is a way of exploring you know, the location.
I'm getting more and more intrigued by counterfeit truffles as we go on. I'm going to pop to the chat before I ask you anything else, and just pick up a few bits from there. So Sophie Lazel says that they've just started A Quiet Death. Very interested to hear from you, Tom, and glad to hear that there are more once they finish reading this one. So that's great. There's a message which came directly to me, actually, rather than in the chat, so you won't see this, from John. John, I believe, is tuning in via the library on our library laptop this morning. John says that he enjoyed the first book by you, Trevor. I know that it came back into the library the other day, so there you go. You've earned 8p from that loan.
Thank you, John.
And John enjoyed that very much and asks, is it going to be a trilogy because he wants to read more of them?
It is going to be exactly that. Yeah, I'm just finishing the final copy editing on book 3, which will be called Dead End Street. Like I said earlier, I originally wrote The Man on the Street as a standalone. In my head, a homeless man's not going to see a murder every day and trip over bodies and the police aren't interested and he gets involved in solving crimes. If I want to keep it real, I was kind of eventually persuaded it would be a series, but I couldn't see past 3 books really without losing the authenticity of the situation, I think. So despite my publisher's pleas, I've stuck to that. So Dead End Street will be the final book in the trilogy until nobody buys my 4th standalone book and I have to revisit my thinking on that.
Well, we'll maybe compare that this afternoon because Kate Ellis, of course, is giving our kind of keynote talk this afternoon, and Kate's just publishing the 25th Wesley Peterson novel, I believe.
I think if you've got like Tom's got a detective, he can carry on writing those, forever. But my homeless guy doesn't live in Midsummer. There's not bodies all over the place. He can't keep getting involved in crimes that the police either aren't investigating or don't realise have happened.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see past 3 books really.
That's absolutely fair enough. But yes, John, it is a trilogy. The second one, One Way Street, comes out in a couple of days' time. Is that right?
10th of June is the hardback publication. Yeah.
There we go.
Dead End Street is scheduled for January next year.
Okay, perfect. So you should be able to reserve a copy of One Way Street through the library if you want to read book 2 very, very soon. How long have you been living in Italy, Tom? Asks Lucy Sampson.
So, I think we arrived here in around 2007, 2008. We arrived before the financial crisis. I remember that quite clearly because, it completely torpedoed my plans. Because at the time I was working as a freelance and things seemed to be pretty kind of, stable. Then all of a sudden they weren't. And in fact, I've just finished an article for Italia magazine about my kind of early experience. And it was a bit grim. But yeah, so it's been quite a long while now. So it's about 13 years. And yeah, certainly by the time I get to the second book, I would say my Italian pretty much is up to the standards of the detective in my first book. But it's taken that long to grasp the language.
Tom, is your Italian good enough to write for Italian publications? That's incredibly impressive.
No, it's not.
Okay, Sorry, I thought
it's good enough to read them. It's good enough to. I can read newspapers and magazines and all the rest. But and watch the TV and and all the rest. But I wouldn't write. No, but Italia magazine. I meant the English language.
Oh, it's
Italian
English. Okay, fair enough. Okay,
yeah,
I thought, wow. Okay.
No. I mean, I had to learn Italian from zero, and I was never a talented linguist. I mean, I got a CSE in French or whatever, at the age of 45, and that was really tough.
Wow.
Your Italian's better than my Geordie, Tom. Actually, my Geordie's non-existent. I'm not allowed to even try it. My wife would batter me with something.
My daughter just uses Google Translate for her French homework. I mean, there you go, Tom. And what could possibly go wrong? You can write articles that way, it'll be fine. Stu Cummins has asked a question. This is something that I was going to ask all of you in a way anyway. Stu asks this of you, Catherine. We'll maybe extend this afterwards. Stu said, I love the Chalet and found it a really clever mystery. How did you plan and plot all of the complexities of the narrative?
Well, first I want to say thank you to Stu for being such a champion of the Chalet. He's been so enthusiastic about it, and he's also a lot of us took part in an auction recently that my editor did for vaccines in India, and Stu bid to have a character named after himself in my next book, which I was starting to write yesterday. As in the character, not the book. So the answer is I'm very much what's called a pantser, which means I kind of make it up as I go along. So with the Chalet, I kind of had an idea where things would start and where it would finish. But the middle, I kind of had to write it and see how it got there. So it was kind of a question of just writing it and seeing how things went along. And in fact, there's a sort of third timeline in the Chalet of a little girl, which I totally hadn't planned at all. And in the end, the whole book kind of hung around that. So I realise it's not a very helpful answer, but I tend to just sort of make it up as I go along in each of the books. So I'm hoping it will come together for the third one, because at the moment it's feeling like a bit more of an effort. But yeah, so I do try and plan. I have my board with my post-its on, usually coloured post-its, different colours for different plot lines, but normally the book ends up taking a different theme anyway. So I try to plan, but I don't really manage it very well.
My wife Tracy is very much a proponent of the post-it note use for her writing. In fact, I have my camera quite carefully angled because you can't really see her whiteboard just here, because it's got all her notes for her current novel on it, and I'm not allowed to do that. You kind of envision, don't you, with crime authors, they should have a big board, but it should have little red lines connecting all the bits together, like a kind of sort of CSI board or whatever. Yours looks exactly like Tracy's, Catherine.
Yeah, Victoria Dowd definitely has one of those, doesn't she? I've seen it in the background.
Hers looks really cool, yeah.
Yeah, we'll hear from Victoria later on at 1:30 when she talks about Agatha Christie. Yes, Victoria has a very cool board, definitely. Trevor, Tom, plotters or pantsers? Which way do you go with your writing?
I'm an absolute solid pantser. I don't plot at all. I generally start with an incident and go from there and let my characters wander about wherever they will, which I find much more interesting. It's kind of more organic for me. It means I have to do a lot of editing to make sure the plot's holding together, and I have to go back and change things quite a bit. But I much more enjoy doing that than trying to plot. I just can't do it. I can't even write a synopsis of my books, even when they're written. It's just too dull.
Tom?
I think I started off, definitely started off as a pantser. But I think I wouldn't say by any means that I'm becoming a serious plotter now, because, you know, the idea of having to sort of write chapter by chapter or what have you just, you know, terrifies me. But I did, you know, for example, I had to write A Quiet Death twice. You know, the first time I wrote it, I couldn't get an agent, and then I had to sort of write another version, but pretty much completely different, another 80,000 words. And then with my second novel, The Hunting Season, pretty much this, even though I had a contract, you know, the first book I submitted was, you know, rejected by the publisher, and I managed to scrape about 5,000 words from that, because the theme, you know, the subject and the settings were pretty much the same. So I got the descriptions, but then I had to write a whole other book, which thankfully they liked. But so I think that these days, in the third book they accepted first time, and so these days I am becoming a semi-plotter, I would say. I have an idea, I have a shape, I can see the sort of silhouette emerging through the fog, and then I set about describing it, I would say.
Do you find working in that way, Catherine, Trevor, you know, very, very much organically, are you making it more difficult for yourself in some respects to throw in the kind of red herrings and things that a crime novel needs, or does it actually happen more obviously that way?
To be honest, I mean, for me, this is going to sound a bit pretentious, I think, but I think I quite often find that things are kind of in by accident as red herrings that I hadn't really planned. But when you look back, you think, oh, okay, if you know, that way that could kind of indicate this, and okay, you do have to go back and change things a bit, as Trevor said, because suddenly you've got a character that died earlier in the book and suddenly they've come back to life, or vice versa, or you know, or someone's changed name. I noticed I was going through The Cruise, my new book, yesterday, and quite a lot of people had several names, but yeah, and to be honest, the other thing for me is it just makes it more interesting, because and again, this is going to sound quite pretentious, but your characters can then surprise you. Suddenly they do something that again, there's in the Chalet, there's an event that happens halfway through, which totally hadn't planned, which almost the whole book hangs on. I think, yeah, it's more difficult for me anyway, not for everybody, I'm sure, but to sit down with just sort of a piece of paper and think, okay, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and then it finishes. Yeah, like Trevor, I can't really do that. So yeah, it's hard to describe really, but yeah, and I think the only way, yeah, in some ways it does make it harder for yourself, in that there'll probably be whole chunks of the book you have to take out that because they end up being pointless, or they end up just not really fitting with the rest of it. So
You've
yeah,
definitely
I think most people work one way or another, and yeah, find that one way works better for them, not for everybody.
You've definitely got to like editing if you do it that way, but I like Catherine, I'm constantly surprised with what my characters do. I have no idea where they're going to go at times, and I kind of feel if I'm being surprised, then the readers are probably going to be surprised. It just feels a natural way to write. I think Lee Child does it the same way, and I know he said that he's a storyteller, and once he told the story, he wants to move on and tell another story. So if I sat down and planned out my story, by the time I got to the end, I wouldn't want to write it because I already know what's going to happen. It's kind of, the job's done. So I wouldn't do it any other way.
I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because there are quite a few messages in the chat now. Michelle asks you, Trevor, how much research did you do and how much responsibility did you feel to do justice to the mental health aspects of your main character? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, the answer is a lot for both parts of the question, I think. When I first came up with the idea, I wasn't sure I was the guy to write it. I liked the idea of a homeless man seeing a murder and nobody believing him, but I've never been homeless. I didn't know a huge amount about it. So I started to do some research, and the first thing I found was that they think about 10% of the homeless are ex-servicemen, and I was in the Royal Navy for 16 years. So I thought, okay, I've got to weigh in. I know what an ex-serviceman thinks like. And I started to research how ex-servicemen end up on the streets, which primarily is due to PTSD, not all the time, but mostly. I found a fantastic book that I keep by my side all the time, which I'd heartily recommend to anybody who wants to learn a bit more about PTSD. Veterans Survival Guide. It's written by a guy called Jimmy Johnson, who served 2 terms in Northern Ireland in the army, had terrible PTSD, came out, woke up one day with a dead body lying next to him, and is now in prison for life for murder that he committed during a flashback. To his great credit, he's not wasted that time, and he's written this book for other servicemen, urging them to get treatment and describing exactly what it's like. And that was a real inspiration for me. And for the homeless side, I started volunteering at an organisation called the People's Kitchen in Newcastle, which is entirely volunteer run, gets no public funding, only survives on donations, but feeds now about 240 people every day. So I work there as a cook on a Tuesday afternoon every week, which is A, great fun, B, exhausting, but C, gets me off my chair and stops me from just sitting around writing all day. So it's very useful and very informative. And it also feels like I'm giving something back to a community that I'm writing about as well.
Excellent. Lucy also says, Trevor, if you need a beta reader, you know where to come. I'll let you sort yourselves out there. And Lucy also says you made reference to a possible standalone. Can you tell us anything about this, Trevor?
Yes, very briefly. It's set in a remote Northumberland village, and as usual with me, all I know is how it starts. So a 15-year-old girl suddenly sees her reclusive father commit a shocking act of violence, and the friends of the people he commits it against are holding the village in a siege, if you like, trying to find the girl. I have no idea why or what's going on, but you know, I'll work that out as I go along.
There you go.
I've also no idea whether I can write an entire book from the perspective of a 15-year-old girl, but you know, you've got to try.
You have. And on that very note of making this all up as you go along, Michelle says that you're all a very bad influence on a new writer like her, for not plotting to in kind of minute detail as you go along. But as Lucy points out, writers are generally a bad influence anyway, just in a good way. Louise, I'm doing creative writing. Start with a word or a subject and then write whatever comes into my head. You do not realize how much your subconscious mind holds. It's amazing. Does anybody else do this? There's some discussion about this in the chat, but any of you three gone that route with anything you've written?
Not really, but I think it's along, not specifically, but then I think it's, you know, as we were talking about a minute ago, things can pop up that you weren't planning at all. And you think, oh, okay, I didn't even know I was thinking about that. So I suppose it's a similar kind of vein. And I personally, I don't do writing exercises because I'm too lazy, but yeah, I think it's a similar sort of idea, yeah.
I'll just throw back at you that Elizabeth Juicy, author, says in the chat, I do that as a warm-up quite often. So there you go. That's two very different approaches between two authors there.
We haven't got time to do warm-ups. We've got to write 90,000 words in about 8 months, you know. Need every single one of those words to get to the end of the book.
Depends on the demands of your publisher, doesn't it? There's a question from Francis for both you, Trevor, and for Tom as well. You both have recurring main characters. Have you got to know them better over the 3 books, or were they fully formed in your head from the start? Tom, you go first.
Oh, I think certainly better. Yeah, certainly better. And because my character comes with the kind of baggage of a whole kind of ecosystem around him. So, you know, there's his daughter, there's his father-in-law, there's the cousin who lives downstairs, and so on. So they kind of, you know, bounce off each other. And one of the things that I remember when I was writing the first novel, I had a mentor through a literary consultancy, and he said, oh, you know, I really like the way that your detective and his father-in-law, who's in his 70s, an ex-carabinieri, they kind of, you know, they kind of bounce off each other. And I hadn't really thought very much about that. But coming back in a way to what we were talking about earlier, I've noticed as the novels have gone on, they really do have this kind of banter with each other, and they really do have this kind of developing relationship. And yeah, it's been fascinating to kind of, you know, watch how you know, the protagonist Daniel has literally taken on a life of his own with a family of his own, and I know where they live, and I really do sort of, you know, view them as a kind of, you know, another family sort of living across the city. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, same for me, Mark. Really, I didn't know a great deal about Jimmy when I started, and in fact, the kind of point of the start of the first book is that he's hiding from life. He barely talks to anybody. He doesn't actually say a word to anybody in the first 5 chapters. I think he speaks to his dog once in that entire period. And he's gradually brought back into the real world by various other characters. And he has 2 kind of sidekicks, Gadge and Dino, 2 other homeless guys who help him kind of start to come back into the real world, really. And they were one of the reasons, so it's not just Jimmy, but they were the reasons I was happy to write 3 books, because in the first book, we find out all about Jimmy's previous history and how he's ended up on the street. And then in books 2 and 3, we find out how Gadge ended up on the street. And in book 2 is Dino. And in book 3, we find out how Gadge has ended up on the street. So all of those characters are recurring, and I'm getting to know them better every time.
Excellent. I'm going to throw a question in at this point. Any of you written or intend to write or have tried writing in very different genres other than the genre in which you are predominantly now working?
I can go first. Go on, Catherine, you go.
Okay. I wrote, well, what would now be called chick lit. I'm not sure what the correct term is anymore. Is it women's fiction?
There are a number of terms.
Whatever. Pardon?
There are a number of terms. Some people do still use chick lit, romantic comedy, rom-com, women's fiction, depends on
my first book I wrote was, 20 years ago, was that. I did have an agent for it who was very excited about it, but she never found a publisher for it. And I wrote quite a lot of, again, unpublished young adult fiction, but some of that has been slightly recycled into some of my later books. And I've also done what was called New Adult, which is basically, I mean, not meaning to, it's kind of young adult with sex. I entered a competition run by Hotkey, which was doing a little, they were writing novellas. They did a Christmas competition and I won. And that was, I think it was 2013. So that was published as an ebook. I think in the end, nobody really bought them, but so yeah, those are my other ones. But I've always really, really liked thrillers, and even the young adult ones where they were basically young adult thrillers. So in the end, that was what I was most drawn to.
Go on, Trevor, you were going to say?
Well, I have a comic crime book in my drawer, which is excellent, but as yet unpublished, but I might come back to it one day. But before that, I have co-written about 12 plays, mostly comedy, quite broad comedy. And just to give you an example of how different they are from the gritty crime thrillers, the most successful play, which is toured all over the world, is called Dirty Dusting, which is about 3 elderly cleaning ladies who set up a telephone sex chat line. So yeah, I've done different stuff.
So they've been performed. That's brilliant.
I'm just going to make a note of this one for reference.
Coming to a theatre near you later this year, Mark, I think.
Well, let's hope so.
With Vicky Michelle from A Lower Low and Vicky Entwistle from Coronation Street, I believe.
It's got so much to offer, hasn't it? That play, it really has.
It's a funny play.
Tom, what about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wrote tons of stuff in all sorts of genres before I started the Daniel Lester series, because in a sense, I was probably like a lot of people out there. I was always, a keen writer, and always trying to kind of come up with various ideas, but nothing quite gelled. And so I kind of came to Italy by accident. Basically, my wife was offered a job and I kind of came with the luggage. And then, the series was sort of handed to me on a plate in that sense. So what is my point? My point is that, yes, I'm kind of married to this kind of idea of the Daniel Lester series because I love writing about Italy and exploring Italy, through the characters, and just, it's just so fascinating. But on the other hand, I'm still interested in, for example, writing UK set novels, probably more kind of down the kind of contemporary fiction, or even sort of literary thriller sort of route. I want to. I've got one that's currently being subbed, and another one sort of that I'd like to kind of write in if I can find any time when I'm sort of having to sort of deliver the Daniel Lester a year, basically. So yeah,
I've actually read that literary fiction book and it's very good. I should tell.
Thank you, Trevor.
Look out for it. Also, it's interesting, Mark. I don't know if you know this, but we are all ex-journalists of one form or another. Which yes, obviously is a different style of writing as well.
Yes, I had twigged that from your biographies, actually, which have all been posted on our Facebook page over the last kind of couple of weeks. So maybe people who've been paying close attention might have picked up on that as well. And one of you has police connections as well, of course, don't you?
Oh yes, yes. Well, sorry, I couldn't be of more help with the Black Museum.
Actually, you were tremendous help, because the Met Police Museums are now doing a talk for me at my event next week.
Fantastic!
So there you go.
Because I used to be a spokesperson for Scotland Yard many moons ago, and actually, in the early 90s, and actually. A lot of the Italian police procedure and the attitudes of the Italian police. I actually do know a couple of cops here, but they are kind of certainly influenced by my kind of life on Mars experience of the British police in the early 90s. Without a doubt.
Just to give a bit of context to that, to hijack for 30 seconds, I am putting on a day of talks next Saturday as a fundraiser for a library and archive project which I run. There's a link there in the chat, bit.ly/folklorelib for people who want to know about the talks. It's talks from some of the top UK libraries, museums and archives. So the British Library, the British Museum, the National Science and Media Museum, and many, many others are giving talks during the day. There's details on that link. But I asked Tom, because he was ex-Met, about the Black Museum. And although Tom wasn't able to speak on that subject himself, he put me in touch with the Met Police Museums, who are now going to give a talk for the event. So there you go. That will be really interesting, because I think the Met Police Museums are not particularly well known about, even in the UK. And people think, oh, that's just if they've got, they've probably got a few guns and knives and things from crimes, and that's about it. But Jeffrey Dahmer's cooking pot is apparently quite popular. But they really have, really wide range of artifacts, Victorian truncheons, cell doors, all sorts of things. You can learn about it next weekend if you want to know about that. I'm just going to turn your camera off for just a second, Tim. That's our next speaker hijacking the event. Welcome. It's absolutely fine. Welcome to you. We'll tell people all about you in just a moment. I need to wrap this one up in just a second. There is one more question which we can take in the chat here before I do, from Michelle, who says, interesting that you all have written in many genres. Do you think it's the industry that forces writers to choose the genre that they write in? Catherine, you go first.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, for example, just think I could not write literary fiction, even if someone held a gun to my head. I think to a degree, everybody picks their own kind of genre, but it might take a while to actually find what's most natural for you, I think. I mean, obviously some books are probably going to be easier to place than others, and there are also sometimes your publisher will want you to write a book that's in a similar genre, but equally there are authors like Callie Taylor, for example, who write across several. So I would say it depends, personally. Yeah. I don't know what the others think.
I think forces is a bit too strong. I think they do like to pigeonhole you, certainly. But there are lots of publishers out there. If you want to change genre, you can always attempt to move to another publisher. I mean, I did mention to my agent the other day that I was thinking of writing a rom-com, and I heard him gasp on the other end of the phone. So they're not keen, let's say, but I don't think they would force you. If you really wanted to write a different kind of book, there's nothing to stop you writing.
Yeah, there are plenty to do it under different names, or even some names. So I mean, like, for example, an obvious example is J.K. Rowling. So it probably depends who you are and what you're writing.
In fact, Jenny Kane, who's speaking this afternoon on her rom-com, for want of a better term, series, also writes historical fiction under Jennifer Ash as well, for example. So it's not. Yeah,
there's quite a few, I think.
Yeah. Do you think, just to close this off, Tom, that it's also not just the forces in the industry, but it's the forces amongst the readership that make authors choose which genre to write in as well. We can say from the library for definite, crime books, thriller books, family sagas, they all issue really well. Other genres perhaps not so well in our area. It's different in different parts of the country, I'm sure. Does that have an influence on you too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reality is, and I suppose it's always been like this for authors, the kind of market does very much influence publishing choice. Publishers and agents have to pay mortgages too, and they are sort of quite driven, I think, by what people are buying. I saw a statistic the other day that said something like, is it 75-80% of readers are women? Something like that. Not
it's necessarily a high percentage.
Crime. Yeah, but it's a very high percentage, and presumably that influences the market in certain ways. Crime fiction is currently one of the most popular genre, but I don't think it's always been like that. And I think that the people's changing habits. One of the things that worried me about lockdown was the fact that people weren't going to be commuting very much. And I don't know about everyone else, but I only used to read when I was commuting. And I wondered how that might influence, people's buying habits. And apparently people started buying more classic authors than contemporary authors, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very fluid market. And at the end of the day, if you're a submitting author, agents and publishers, you know, are going to have that in mind, because at the end of the day, the agent has got to front it to the publisher, and the publisher, this is the interesting thing that I didn't realize before I was published, it's not just about an editor saying, you know, oh, I love this book. Then they have to actually take that book to a what do they call it?
Acquisition. They basically have to sell it into marketing and sales and all the other departments.
Yeah, so they then have to sort of champion it and sell it to all of these other departments. So it's quite a process, to be honest.
It's far more complex, isn't it, than people realise. I'm going to wrap this one up at that point to allow us a few minutes to change over from one panel to the next. I will just finish off by saying thank you, firstly, to all of you for taking the time to come on. You have mentioned your titles, and when they are due out, if they are not already out as well. Anybody in the audience, if you want to have a read of Catherine, Trevor or Tom's books, then you can, of course, borrow them from the library, or you can, of course, buy them for yourself, and please do so and support these very worthy authors. I am just going to also just make this final point as well, which I will do during the day, that the Literary Festival is hosted for you all today by us at Crediton Library, and it is completely free of charge. You are welcome to come to as much as you like without having to pay a single penny. The library is a charity. We're not part of the council. We're not part of any of those things. The library service across Devon is a charity. If you enjoy yourself today and you want to show your appreciation, then you can do so by supporting us with a small donation. There is a link there which I will leave on screen during the day for people, bit.ly/support-the-library, where you can leave us a donation. If you choose to do so, please just put a little note on your donation. There is an option to put notes on it. Put a note on that says, I thought Crediton Literary Festival was absolutely amazing, and then we'll know that your donation was from the Literary Festival, and it makes us all look really good too. Thank you so much. In the meantime, please show your appreciation in the chat window or wherever else you want to show it, really, for Trevor, for Catherine, and for Tom, our wonderful crime panel. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.